So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. We're just seeing the first 25, 30 people just dialing in and connecting. So welcome. We'll start in just a second. Just share with you that so far we have people signing in from Belgium, Norway, UK, different places in the Middle East, Germany. We have Serbia. We have quite a number of Asian names in here. So we have, Bill, we have a good list of different participants already.
I think that'll make it even more interesting. I'm looking forward to this, Christian.
So am I, so am I. So welcome everyone to Navigating Fast-Moving Unknown Futures with Bill Fischer. Now I want to just quickly share with you a story. Bill, I don't even know if you remember this, but the first time we met was in Switzerland at IMD, where I traveled down with one of my clients, the strategy team from Statoil or Equinor at the time. And we had this big conference that we were going to. But one of those evenings, we were able to sneak in a dinner with you, Bill. And even to this day, I mean, this is probably, I'm guessing, 8 or 9 years ago. Even to this day, what that team is talking about of that trip and the conference to Switzerland was actually having that time and having that dinner with you, Bill.
I hope it was a good dinner. Did I pay for it or did you pay for it or how did that work? I mean, it sounds memorable.
Well, the conversation was memorable. The food was excellent. And I suspect that the bill was settled in a commendable way, in line with corporate travel account with Equinor Statoil at the time.
You know, I noticed that Paul Hopcraft sent in a quick little note at the bottom of the screen saying Switzerland also called in. I'm with you, Paul. I think there's at least 2 of us on the call.
At least. So Bill, I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. And I know we spent some time discussing and preparing for the topic, but I think what we have in store and also what you've been preparing is really interesting because we are in, completely unprecedented times in terms of, the modern business world and the political system around it. So I'm going to give a quick introduction and then we'll get started on the conversation. So as everyone knows, this is the fourth in a series of 6, the Strategy Tool Speaker Series, and we've been extremely fortunate to get Scott, Anthony, Rita McGrath, and Alex Osterwalder, and now Bill Fischer. And the unique thing is that we have all these great people, and they come in applying their own lens or their own set of theories on the situation that we're in. So this is really unique and really, really appreciated. And we have a number of questions. So please ask any questions along the way. I will be picking up questions as we go, and I may throw in a few curveball questions at Bill along the way. But we'll keep it gentle and civil. And then of course we'll have time to answer any questions towards the end. And just in case, if there are any questions that don't get answered, we can try to do a follow-up on that in a written format if people are interested. So my name is Chris, and I'm the founder and CEO of Strategy Tools and a number of other ventures. But most importantly, right now, I'm really trying to work with governments and business schools and companies and understanding how do we navigate through this, not only crisis, but this period of uncertainty. And then we have Bill Fischer. Now, many of you probably know Bill. I hope many of you have heard some of his talks or even been to some of his programs. He is a professor at IMD. He is, Bill, I think you're an American with a double residency in Europe, but you spend a large part of your professional life in Asia. Is that correct?
Well, so I've lived in Asia for, a significant portion of my life. I have US and Swiss citizenship. We've lived outside, I'm from New York, and we've lived outside of the US for the last 24 years, mostly in Switzerland. And, but there was a period before that where we were spending a lot of time in Asia. And I've actually worked in China one way or another every year for the last 40 years. So I've had the privilege of watching that extraordinary transformation firsthand.
And speaking of China, one of the things that I really follow your work on, Bill, is how in one of your recent books is the work around hire and really a new management systems for large organizations.
Peter Drucker once said, maybe about 30 years ago now, that the next big, after Japan changed the way we thought about manufacturing in the 70s and 80s, that his belief was the next big school of management insight would come out of China. And for those of us who were working in China in the 80s, that seemed like a rather extraordinary statement. But what I see with hire today is that there is a capacity to rethink organizations that's profound, and I've become a great admirer of some of the things that are happening there.
Bill, I'm also curious in terms of your background with the WHO for the last 17 years.
In the 80s, as a result of the work that I was doing in China, I was asked by the WHO to have a series of short-term consultancies. So these usually were 2 weeks, less than a month, every year for about 17 years. And they took me to all sorts of places that I would never have gotten to otherwise. And it was always about the management of medical research, which the WHO was sponsoring. So it was a chance to see both how the WHO worked, how the community of medical researchers that were being supported by the WHO worked, but also the challenges of doing innovation. And that's primarily what it was, doing innovation in what we called at the time the developing world. And it was an education in itself. I learned a lot, and I will be forever grateful to the WHO. And I've become a great admirer of what the WHO is doing. So at a time where it seems fashionable to beat up on the WHO, I consider myself a real supporter of the organization. I think like any organization, a complex organization, it has, operational, it has problems, but the intentions and the vision of the organization outweigh any of those shortcomings, I think.
No, I mean, this is a wonderful, and I'm really impressed, Bill, with the breadth of background you have that takes us into this conversation today.
Well, you said earlier in the introduction that everyone should bring their own lens, and so that's what I hope to do. And I have to say, first of all, I'm a little bit embarrassed by how many words are on this slide, and knowing that I contributed them, and your slide was so elegant. But as an academic, I'm used to getting paid by the word, and so this seemed to be a good solution. I think that I've had a really interesting opportunity to look at the world of innovation from a number of different perspectives, and the WHO relationship really helped me look at the world of innovation both on a global level as funded by one particular UN organization, but also to look at the nexus between government, society, and the talent pool in local economies. And that was a piece that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. But what I would like to say right at the beginning is that I had a lot of really, I was fortunate to have a lot of really good opportunities to see the innovation world. What I didn't have was a story. So what I lacked was some framework to hang my observations on. And it wasn't until we wrote the Virtuoso Teams book, which was now 15 years ago, I wrote with Andy Boynton, that I was first able to actually sort of pull this together. So one of the things that I see when you talk about having a unique lens on the world, we all have unique lenses on the world. I wish I had been able to grind my lens earlier in my career. I didn't realize how important it was to have a coherent story. And I would advise people not to wait as late as I did, but to begin to think about articulating about what do you believe about innovation and how to, or whatever it is, the lens you're using to look at the world, and how does that shape what you see, and then try that out.
Yeah. It's a good, it's a good recommendation early on. Now, what we're going to cover today in the program, and some of you may have joined any of our previous sessions. So we have a brief introduction. We have sort of the main presentation with Bill and I. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and then we're going to open up for Q&As. And please feel free to ask any questions. Then we're going to have some just closing comments from Bill and myself. Now, Bill, I'm going to set the scene with just one slide and one slide only. And this is just, a small snapshot into what's happening right now. I think this was in yesterday's Financial Times. Airbus is bleeding cash, says chief executive. And this article actually goes in to talk about an internal letter where the CEO is effectively laying out that this is an existential threat. And with 133,000 employees and the whole sort of aviation landscape in turmoil, there's a very real threat that Airbus may go out of business. And again, this is just one data point. When we look at the travel industry, we look at the energy landscape, we look at a large number of really key industries. We're seeing this same turmoil. We're seeing this fast moving and very abrupt world. So we can have that as a backdrop, Bill. But I think, have we ever seen a moment like this in modern times?
So I think the answer is no. And it's, William Gibson, the Canadian science fiction writer, the author of Neuromancer and so many wonderful science fiction books, he's famous for saying the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And I think that I've used that for years in my classes as a way to get people to think about what could possibly happen. But this time it's for real. And I think that Gibson's right. The future is here. This is the rest of our lives. It might not be the coronavirus. It might be some climate catastrophe. It might be global warming. It might be, but I think that what we're seeing is a transition from a life in the uncertain to a life in the unknown. And I think our future will be much more the unknown than it has been the uncertain. And I think that's important. I think that probably everybody that's listening in is an expert, is a success in dealing with the uncertain. We're in different industries, we do different things, but we all know how our game is played. We know who our rivals are. We know what the rules of the, let me close this. Sorry, I thought I did. We know how all of this stuff works over time. And now what we're trying to do, and we're good at how we manage those types of things. And what we're seeing now is that though we're in a situation, fast moving, completely unpredictable as to what comes next. We're opening up on the basis of very little information, very little data, no experience. We really have an ill-defined rival, if you will, if that's a way of talking about it, that we're dealing with. And I think that what we're seeing is this is the unknown. The unknown is different than the uncertain. The unknown is about not having good data, not having sufficient experience to make predictions or assumptions, and trying to balance the need for expertise with the lack of expertise, if you will, and we're moving at a high speed, both socially and organizationally. So this is a real test for leadership. Leadership somehow needs to step up and step into that void without falling for superficial solutions, but looking for ways to learn from experiences that are not yet fully formed, and small evidence of what might or might not be happening. We have to move from an area of expertise to a commitment to experimentation. We need to test ideas and move back when they don't work and move forward when they do. So it's a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in innovation, but I think what's happened that's caught all of us by surprise is how fast it's come about, and how big the stakes are, how great the stakes are.
Yeah. So what's your observation on that, Bill? How well are companies, adapting, and how well are private companies able to pick up on this?
So, so like everything in our life, there's a distribution, and with that distribution, some are moving very, very fast. So yesterday in the Financial Times, in the same issue, I believe it was yesterday, there was a really interesting article about how Danone responded very fast and recognized that this was important, and hesitation was the wrong response. If I stop for a second and think about my lens, which tends to be the world of innovation, what we know is that S-curves repeat over time, or succeed, not necessarily repeat, but succeed each other. And each time there's a succession, there's a period of confusion and we call disruption that we've never seen before. And in the past, those disruptions happened infrequently enough so that for most of us, it wouldn't interfere with our careers. We could play our careers in this realm of uncertainty rather than the unknown. But when you found yourself to be in that rupture between the old S-curve and whatever was coming next, we know, if you look back historically at industries, hesitation is the absolute worst thing to find yourself in. And yet that's what happened over and over and over again in January and February, when governments, for the most part, but also major organizations, hesitated. Rather than engage, they hesitated. And what struck me about the article about Danone was how fast the CEO said, the 3-year plan is out, forget all that stuff. This is something we've never seen before. We need to engage firsthand. And if I look at the nations who seem to have had the best response to the coronavirus, they also engaged very, very early. Often, take the South Korea, for example, often without complete testing kits, but they knew that they had a test to be able to get data to talk about the magnitude of change and the speed of change and the location of change. Without that, it was hard to do anything. And they moved very, very fast. They moved fast, but they constantly iterated back as their technologies developed, as their testing technologies developed, to make sure that, in fact, that the past data that they had gathered had veracity. So I think one of the things that we see is that speed matters, and that's a leadership. That's a leadership choice. You can either engage and have the self-confidence to change the rules, or you can remain sort of frozen in place for 3, 4, 5 weeks. And I saw last night on one of the news shows that I was watching that had the United States begun testing 10 days earlier, they might have reduced the deaths by 50 to 80,000 people. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of families. And I think that speed matters. Speed matters. The other thing I think that's important is to recognize that the front end of this experience really needed to be where the energy was. You know, yes, we're having problems with ventilators, and yes, we're having problems with available beds, and yes, we're having problems with healthcare workers. Yeah. But had we engaged earlier and faster upstream, we might have been able to reduce the pressure downstream that came about as a result of having playing catch up rather than trying to stay up with the virus. So I think those are two observations that would agree with most of what we see when we talk about innovation, and we didn't apply them. You know, we overlooked them.
So let me pick up on that. And Bill, you teach the IMD program, Driving Strategic Innovation.
Right.
And you've been doing that for some time now, right?
Never. It's a joint program. I think we're in our 18th year. It's a joint program with MIT, with the Sloan School. We do it twice a year, once at Sloan and once at IMD.
I've been recommending that program to a large number of sort of contacts and clients over the years. But Bill, if you were gonna redesign that program, or maybe upgrade it in the age of COVID-19, what would be some elements that you would bring in to take the learning that we're now trying to get from this whole situation and bring it into that Driving Strategic Innovation program?
So it's interesting. You do a program for 18 years and twice a year, and you look back at the program and it's changed almost 90%, right, of the material is changed. We started out as a program that was about commercialization. So everybody came to the program, they were interested in commercialization, they were interested in time to speed to market, and we built funnels and we looked at those sorts of decisions. Today, we would never do that, no. Right? It's not that those things are not important, but we would want to avoid the linearity and sequentiality of that sort of decision making. And yet, in this present coronavirus dilemma, what you see is that when bureaucracy was able to assert itself, people died. If you look at the difference between different regions in Italy, who were experiencing the same phenomena at roughly the same time, those regions that, including the town that my grandfather came from, those regions that were more bureaucratic had less success, more deaths. So I think that one of the things that we have been trying to build in the program over the last 18 years has been leadership. But you know, it's interesting. Executives come to an innovation program because they want to hear about innovation. Yeah. And when we put leadership in, it's looked at as being an intrusion. You know, it's a loss. We want to learn about innovation. Why are we learning about leadership? But clearly, I think what the coronavirus challenge has taught us is that this is all about leadership, right? This is really all about leadership. And it's not only about leadership, it's about changing the rules of leadership. So if you look at the way different leaders are engaging with different populations, you know, the leaders who are able to tell the truth, to be empathetic with a population that is frightened and hurting, those leaders are far more, at least my impression is, far more successful than leaders who are unable to give up a legacy approach to leadership. And it may very well be that as we go through the remaining part of this experience, hopefully not very long, but we don't know, that what we'll see is that the ability to engage what's called essential, ironically called essential workers. These are people who are underpaid and underappreciated, but who are on the front lines of the system, whether it's in the hospitals or in food provisions and the like. the ability to recognize the talent there and engage it, and liberate it, which is very different than working with people who are, mid-level managers, highly paid, and the like. These people are going to be the heroes. It's going to be the leadership style that works, I think, at that level and reestablishes the value of these truly essential workers in our society that are going to come out the heroes. So I sort of have a feeling that one of the things that's going to change as a result of the Corona-19 virus is that we're going to see a very different approach to how we think about organizational design and hierarchy and bureaucracy in the future as a result of this. Not that we haven't known it intellectually for a while, but we haven't felt it as viscerally as we're feeling it now.
No. So if I can just expand on that, Bill, how are you seeing that on the government side? You have the European lens, you have the Asian China lens, and then you also have the US lens.
Yeah, I'm impressed. So I'm impressed by the experiment that's being run right now as to how we open up different areas. And I think one of the things to look for is how different regions, states, provinces, cantons, how different regions succeed or not in the face of opening up, and we'll see various levels of government intervention and various levels of polemical debate over whether we should open up or not, and I think that that'll give us some insights into what works and what doesn't. But for at the moment in our family, what we see, and we have, I mentioned to you before this, we have 3 children who are frontline in the coronavirus battle in U.S. hospitals. What we're impressed by is certainly not the ability of the federal government to take a leading role, but the ability of the state level government, Governor Cuomo, we're New Yorkers, to come in and establish a rapport with the electorate that probably didn't exist before this. Do this very, very fast and do it through honesty and transparency, I believe, and empathy, and change the nature of how you focus when you think about government. And I think that we'll continue to see this sort of change in the center of gravity of where we see government influence over time as a result of this.
Just to build on that again, just a quick question. Do you think that, especially in the US, we will see an acceptance for more government, the bigger role of government? Or is that going to sort of swing back as soon as this thing blows over somehow?
So I do think that there will be a gradual shift in the body politic of the US, a willingness or a recognition, maybe not a welcoming of it, but a recognition that there are times and places where the good of everyone supersedes the good of the individual, and that a reliance on government influence. I mean, it happened in the Great Depression with Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal, and then over time we've drifted away from that. But I suspect we're going to go back to that to an extent. It's a grudging willingness to accept that government has a legitimate role to play when all of us are at stake, rather than when one of us are at stake. And I think to some extent it'll call for a redefinition of what do my personal liberties mean.
Yeah, no, I think we're gonna see like you're saying some recalibration in the social contract in many places post this. But Bill, I want to go back to something you touched on briefly. So let's just say that you had a chance to sit down with three CEOs, big industries in Europe, just for simplicity, and one of them, says, "Yeah, this is gonna rebound very quickly. I'm building my whole business case on the sharp V recovery." The second guy, he says, we're just going to keep investing. We're going to keep innovating through this. There are a few bumps in the road. And the last guy says, I think that we're in probably a 3 to 5 year recalibration. There's going to be a lot of turmoil. There's going to be a lot of unknowns, and our strategy needs to adapt, but we don't know how. So we have the sharp V recovery guy. We have a few bumps in the road, and then we have the last guy who really tries to reset his strategy in light of a very different environment. What would you say? How would you interact with those three around the table?
So I think as as attractive as the sharp V or the dampened W that goes on forever might be,
yeah.
I think that we have no basis to believe that return will be as easy or as guaranteed as they suggest. And there's a real risk in preparing for the past rather than taking an opportunity to move on to the future. So I think every organization, whether it's the coronavirus or not, has to manage the present and the future at the same time. And almost always the present wins. The present wins because it's quantifiable. The present wins because the cash flows are a source of political power. The present wins because we're all living in the present. We may never live in the future. Future is really important. And my sense is that when I started out with Gibson's quote that the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. My sense is that the future that he's talking about is the future of the way organizations work. It's not the future of viruses or the future of that. No. It's a need for, in a world where you can literally, to use one of Rita McGrath's terms, when you can see around the corner and you can see climate change coming right after this, or inevitably. And all of the sorts of catastrophic climate effects that could go along with that. It seems to me that that's the future we ought to be preparing for. We ought to be preparing for a future where the unknown is more prevalent than the uncertain, where we have to move faster than we've done, and where we need to reshape our organizations now to be able to do that. So if I could just extend this answer one more thing. One of the reasons I've been interested in working on with Hire is because I think that what Hire has done in many ways is to try to do this. What they've tried to do is to reinvent their organization, a large, complex organization in an old economy industry. What they've tried to do is to redesign that so that they're better able at dealing with the unknown rather than the uncertain. They're faster. They operate with smaller units that are highly autonomous. And my sense is that that's the future for most of us. Most of our organizations are going to have to do that, not because we want to, not because it's politically correct, but because we're going to be dealing with more things we don't know. We're going to have to deal faster. We can't hesitate.
Well, that's a good time to actually pick up on Hire and open the first question. The first question, Bill, comes from Simon Torrance, who's working on platforms.
That's fair. Can he ask a question?
I think it's open season. Anyone can ask a question, and then it's up to me to dampen the blow. No, seriously. Simon asked a really good question. I know you've been talking about this on conferences, including the Drucker Forum. How easy is it to transfer the Hire model? How easy is it to take learning from the Hire model into large Western organizations?
It's a great question. So I think the answer is you don't want to transfer the Hire model. You want to see what Hire is doing and adapt it to your own organization and make it your own organizations. Hire has some advantages. One of the advantages is that they've been doing this for 35 years. So, there's very little resistance to change at Hire because the people who resisted, they left, and the people who have joined since then know what they're getting themselves into. So kudos to Hire for being consistent over 35 years in a determination to serve the customer better and to unleash the talent of their people. But I think that's a huge advantage, and it's a source of frustration for organizations that try to move the Hire model over to what they're doing. But having said that, I think that it's important to think about what parts of our existing organization would benefit from more autonomy. And then what can I learn from what Hire's done that can help us, for at least those pieces of the organization, provide them with more autonomy so that they can move faster. And those things I think are eminently transferable. What I've always been interested in about Hire is that there's both a vision and there's the dream and the details. And the details are sufficiently well developed and clear so that you can benefit from understanding the mechanics of how they make these things work and applying them in a relatively new situations.
So, Bill, just to sort of bridge that question a little bit, are there any companies in the West that have already taken, let's just say, parts of the Hire model and successfully implemented?
Well, there's General Electric Appliances, who is owned by Hire, right? And they've been in this now 5 or 6 years trying to apply the Reinventing model to what they're doing. I think that it's an interesting experience, and when you go there, you recognize that their interpretation of the Reinventing model is faithful in terms of the desire to serve the customer better, get closer to the customer, the desire to build ecosystems to be able to change the nature of the customer experience, and the desire to unleash the human talent in the organization. The way they actually express those desires are going to be different. They're going to be different culturally. They're going to be different because they're in different marketplaces. Their partners are going to be different. But I think it's not Hire's intention to have a cookie cutter approach that everybody's doing Reinventing around the world the same way. So I think if you look at W.L. Gore, or if you look at Southwestern Airlines, you see elements of this that represent legitimate attempts to try to do what Hire's doing. They call them different names and they're doing them in different ways, but the similarities are interesting.
So just to follow up on that, two questions, Bill. The first question is, if we take a step back, and there's probably people joining us today that have never heard of Hire or never heard of the Hire model. So if you're going to do like the very simple explanation, what would that be? And that's the first one. And then there's a lot of talk around ecosystems and many different interpretations and understanding of ecosystems. And I know you've worked on that as well. So maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into the ecosystem dimension of Hire's model.
Okay, so what you should know about Hire is Hire is a Chinese-based organization based in Qingdao. It's the world's largest manufacturer of home appliances, washing machines, refrigerators, stoves, kitchen equipment, clothing, laundry machines, things of that nature. That's important because they're not a Silicon Valley startup. They have 70,000 people. It's not a bunch of kids running around in flip-flops in an incubator somewhere. These are real people doing real things. And since 1984, they have gone through a series of, by my count, 5 profound reinventions where they've literally changed their business model, and change their organization to support that business model, so that you can go back over those years and look at the choices that were made, and you can see explicit managerial choices that were made to do two things. They've got a consistent goal. One is to serve the customer better. The other is to release the talent in their organization. Today, they own they own Candy in Europe, which is one of the largest European, if not the largest European home appliance company. They own what used to be Sanyo in Japan, now called Aqua. They own Fisher Paykel in New Zealand, General Electric Appliances in the US, and I'm sure I'm missing one or two. But now that they're an international organization rather than a domestic Chinese organization, they want to maintain their commitment to customer service and unleashing entrepreneurial talent in their organizations, but they have to do it in different continents with different cultural norms. And so they are interpreting the Rendon Hui, that's the name of their model. They are reinterpreting that Rendon Hui model in different places at different times. So it's sort of a series of experiments that are running in parallel. Some are successful, some are less successful, but they're determined to be a better provider of customer experiences, and they're determined to fulfill the potential of their employees to the highest degree possible. And I would say to do that in a commodity market, which is what home appliances have traditionally been, is a difficult challenge. Now, what's changed in the home appliance market in the last 4 or 5, 6 years is the introduction of the Internet of Things, the smart home. And so now all of a sudden you have a degree of connectivity in homes that you never had before. So 4 or 5 years ago, a customer would walk into Hire and buy a refrigerator, and if that was it, that was the customer experience. 12 years later, if the customer experience was good, he or she would show up again and buy another refrigerator. But during that period of time, Hire would have almost no contact with them, and there would be really absence of information. Today, that same customer is turning up and wants to buy a refrigerator which speaks to a range, which speaks to an entirely rewired home, and they want to talk to Hire. So if I have a smart refrigerator in my home, I don't want to talk to Hire once every 12 years. I want to talk to Hire 12 times a day. I want recipes. I want to know, are these berries that I bought truly organic? I want to know, what might I add to my meals that I haven't thought of before? I want to know about wines that I could serve. And all of this is, I would say that all of this is information that Hire has been historically unprepared to provide. So all of a sudden, you think about, we talked earlier, we started the conversation about how fast and profound the COVID virus is. In many ways, the smart home of the future, if you're an appliance maker, has come very fast, and we're equally unprepared. We don't have recipe writers. I don't have links with the farmers. I've had no contact with these people. So what Hire has decided to do is, rather than try to solve these problems on their own, what they've attempted to do is to build an ecosystem of partnerships in food, in laundry, in hospitals, in recreational vehicles, where you invite in a large number. We're talking a couple of thousand partners who do have expertise in these areas, and who over time can work together to redefine the customer experience in ways that the customers probably never ever thought about, but bring them together in a coherent offering to go to market, and to be able to do that on a unique basis. So in a sense, the realization of the customer as not a mass consumer, but as a unique buyer in a large marketplace can be realized as well. And they are, I would say, 3 or 4 years into this ecosystem experience and have discovered that it's profoundly different. It's a different way of working. It requires different ways of engaging with the customer not with the customer, with what used to be your value chain partners. But value chains are linear and sequential. Yeah. And value chains sort of lock people into positions that have been legacy positions. And what Hire is attempting to do now is to re-engineer those relationships so that they're more dynamic, more unpredictable, I would think, because we have no idea what the home of the future is going to be like. We know it's going to be connected. We know it's going to be smarter. But beyond that, we really don't have a good answer to what it's going to be like. So rather than try to predict that, what Hire has tried to do is to invite potential partners in to experiment. Most of the experience won't work, but some will.
Yeah. So Bill, Reinventing Giants, that's your book on Hire, and I've been using it in some programs on strategy and innovation previously. What I haven't heard so much about is, how did you get in there in the first place? So, what's the personal story that ended you up in that collaboration with Hire?
So in the late 90s, I had the good fortune of being the president and dean of China Europe International Business School, CEIBS, which we immodestly but truly believed was one of the really special business schools in Asia, if not in China. And I had an amazing group of people that I worked with. And in 1997, one of the people that was on our staff said, there's this organization in Qingdao that's really doing interesting things. You ought to go up there and meet them. So I first met John Ray Min, who's the CEO of Hire, in 1997 in Qingdao. And we've stayed in touch ever since, because what he was doing was so interesting. He was redefining not only what the Chinese corporation of the future should be like, but what any corporation of the future should be like. And I became and by that I mean greater autonomy, faster response, closer to the customer, more free to choose in those days, value chain partners that you would engage with. And I thought this was amazing. We needed this not only as a relationship for CIBS, but to represent what China could be. I was actually thinking at the time of what Peter Drucker had said was, at some point, we're going to see the next big ideas come out of China. Yeah. And so this was a great opportunity. And I've stayed in touch with Zhang Min over the years. An Italian colleague, Umberto Lago, had the idea to write the Reinventing Giants. It was really his idea. He wanted to write this book about how Hire was reinventing itself yet again. And that really opened up our eyes to what Hire was doing. We had extraordinary access, and were able to tell the Hire story. And I would say that the book you have, Reinventing Giants, which I think everybody should read, I think it's a great read, really doesn't take us to the next step. And so what we're doing now is we're working on ways of interpreting the next step of what Hire is doing. So I'm working with Simone Cicero and Boundaryless to try to create canvases in the spirit of what Alex Osterwalder did with the business model, to try to create canvases which would allow other organizations, not Hire organizations, but other organizations, to be able to say, well, I now see what Hire did and why they did it. What do we want to do? And what would be the choices that we need to make? And how can I best make those choices?
It's a fascinating journey you described, Bill. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I actually lived in Macau in, what was that, 2000, 2001. And I traveled extensively on the mainland, and I can just imagine, what that process must have been for you guys back then. I want to take your experiences and basically what you just said and bring it back to, the present, and bring it back to the, this turmoil that we're in. How hard or easy do you think it is for companies right now today to start applying new management principles, to start redesigning the organization, to start reinventing giants when we have, this turbulence that we have?
So, leaders like to talk about having burning platforms. And I'm always a little bit leery of burning platforms because I think some of those platforms can burn and, you can't get off of them. But we have a burning platform right now. We have a real need to reestablish the organizations that we had and recognize that over the past 3 or 4 months, a very short period of time, the world that they're going to be re-entering is going to be different. Yeah. And if we attempt to rejoin a different world without changing our organizations or without changing our own leadership style, then I regard that as hubris. I regard that as being, so much of a believer in what we've done in the past that there's no opportunity for change. My sense is that the present reality of the COVID-19 virus is that it's calling out for changes. It's calling out for changes in the way in which we organize. It's calling out for changes in the way in which we lead. And I think that we are seeing some leaders step up to that. But the one thing we know for sure is that hesitation is the wrong approach. No matter what you do, hesitating is the wrong approach.
We have a good number of people joining us that I know that I know are either just getting into consulting or on the verge of considering going into consulting. Right. They're going to meet a very different marketplace than, say, 6 months, even just 3 months ago. So for people specifically that are joining us, that are leaving big companies to go into a consulting environment, what are some advice that we could provide for them?
So learning is more important than knowing. Okay, what you know is at risk, but how you learn is going to be the key to your future. You need to become radically outside in. The answers to what comes next are not inside your organization, God forbid inside your mind, but they're out there in the communities that you work with, people who are trying things. So my sense is that ensure that you are radically outside in, but recognize that learning is a process. And scalable learning, John Hagel talks about scalable learning all the time. Scalable learning is critically important as you grow as an organization so that you test your ideas with others and share those ideas across your organization. So I would worry about those things. Not worry in the sense of trying to make them better, make them work in difficult conditions. And I think that you should not hesitate to be experimental. There's a movement called Working Out Loud, started in the UK. And the idea behind Working Out Loud is that you prototype, not prototype, but prototype your ideas as you're developing them so that the ideas can be better. I would adopt that as a way of working, both as an individual and an organization. Let's try things. We're in the unknown. We're not in the uncertain. So we've never done this before. So let's take some small, minimal viable representation experiments and let's see what works and share that information as quickly as we can. Don't do it alone. Do it with others.
Even in lockdown. As
long as you're you know, as long as you're 6 meters away, you can do anything you like, or 2 meters away, you can do anything you like. But yes, but doing it with others is such a powerful idea. And doing it by yourself will result in you being a hostage to legacy knowledge.
Yeah. So let me wrap up. We have a lot of good questions here, but let me wrap up this the question part with the final question. So Bill, let's say we have a CEO of a big company, and he or she really recognizes the severity of the time we're in, and decides that we need fundamentally to change both our vision, strategy, structure, and really try to get ahead of this. I mean, I think the Danone example was really good. What would be some early steps to get that change done while we have this turmoil again?
Well, I think at the moment, at the moment, it's really important to listen to your people. So before you're creating new visions and the like, listen to the people who are working for you today. Listen to their concerns. Listen to what they would do. Listen to their hopes. And begin to build an organization that's highly empathetic, but building on the expertise and knowledge of the people around you. And then at some point, and I would try some of the things they're suggesting in terms of the way in which you reinvent work. My wife and I were talking today about one of our children tested positive for the coronavirus, and thankfully now appears to be over it. She works in a group of five people, all of whom have it. And they all have it because of the legacy position they were put in, I think, in the way in which they work. Had somebody sat down with them and talked to them about their hopes and fears and insights, they could have probably spared any of them, all of them, the agony of going through this. So I think that you need to be outside in terms of thinking about what's going on in the world around you, and you need to be close to the people inside in understanding how they see this and how they would respond to it. I start with the assumption that everybody that I work with wants to do a great job, that they come to work motivated and excited, and that over time it's the organization and the leadership that sap their energy. So let's try to reestablish that excitement and commitment and get back to what that was. And that means, you know what, at the end of the day, almost every idea I have about leadership requires giving up control. Not losing control, but giving it up, sharing it with others, not abdicating responsibility, but letting others come in and be part of it.
Bill, this is, just like we were planning and just like we were hoping, a wide-ranging conversation on very different topics from Asia, China, Europe, and the US. If you were gonna close out with just a very short sort of, what is the single most important thing for leaders moving forward?
Yeah, I guess my sense is to invite others in. Trust, be outside in, understand what's going on in the world around you. Look around those corners, as Rita so eloquently says. Pay attention to the future as well as the present, but also elevate. Richard Straub yesterday from the Drucker Forum used the word elevate. Elevate the people around you so that they have a larger role to play in the life of the organization. Share that leadership role that you have, that privilege with others, so that they come out of this better as well.
Bill, those are wise and excellent closing words. It's really good to see you again. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise here.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's always good to see you.
Always a pleasure. So in our next conversations we have on May 12th. The View from the Valley with Rick Rasmussen. He's going to give us an update on sort of what he's seeing in the landscape in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley. And then also on May 19, we have Simon Torrance on digital and digital platform business models. You know, Bill, this is so much fun, and it's such a luxury to have these conversations.
I love it. And thank you so much for setting up this has been a great set of talks. This is wonderful. It's really helped, get through this period of time.
Wonderful. Well, stay safe. All the best to the family. And I look forward to seeing you again in person.
Good. See you. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,